It's said that you can tell a lot about a city by its tallest building. In New York, that was once the Chrysler Building, capitalism colliding with Art Deco and pure, unadulterated hubris, a silver crown reigning supreme over the skyline. But what happens when that crown is covered up? What does that tell you about a city? Manhattan wouldn't be the place it is today without the skyscraper. When it was first formed millions of years ago, its geographic size wasn't that notable. If it had stayed a small low-rise island, it probably wouldn't have amounted to much. But these remarkable structures, these needles of steel and ambition, have let it continuously increase its area, its vertical territory, to welcome the millions of people and businesses who all want a slice of the action. In New York, this isn't just true, it's the entire story. This city wasn't just filled with skyscrapers, it was made by them. These awe-inspiring buildings have risen through every single chapter of this city's story. Each one is a distinct product of the context and forces in play at the time. Each one came to influence and shape the era that followed. We saw it in the extravagance of the 1,920 seconds, then in the slicked-back corporate modernism of the 60 seconds. Skyscrapers personified the branded excess of the 80 seconds. But then they found themselves in a terrifying existential crisis after 9/11, when few knew what a skyscraper should be anymore. And now, they're coming to represent some of the city's biggest challenges once again in the 2020 seconds. What happens in New York is reflected in its skyscrapers. They stand both as monuments to its past and as silent influences of its future. This city is so much more than just the home of the skyscraper. It was built by them. Joseph Campbell famously said that you can tell what drives a city by its tallest building. In medieval times, it was the spire of a cathedral, reaching for God. In 18th century towns, it was the political palace, projecting power. In 1,920 seconds, New York, it was the office building, the American dream embodied by steel and sheer grit. The skyscraper was capitalism incarnate. The Roaring Twenties was a decade defined by almost comical excess and wealth. It marked the final transition of power from London to New York as the world's metropolis. And all that energy gave rise to the Chrysler Building, a shining beacon that announced America's wild success. And what's more characteristic of the American dream than raw, unabated competition? The Chrysler Building's very existence was fueled by the fierce, bitter rivalry of two former business partners, architects Craig Severance and William Van Allen. Severance was hired to design the Manhattan Co. building, which we now know as 40 Wall Street. Van Allen was hired by auto magnate Walter Chrysler to design his monument. Both men were locked in a public, obsessive, and deeply personal race to build the world's tallest skyscraper, and both would do pretty much anything to win. This wasn't just construction, it was espionage. As the planning and building took place, designers from either side would steal or intentionally leak fake plans. Severance, at 40 Wall Street, began adding more and more floors, pushing the limits of what his foundations could handle in a desperate attempt to best Chrysler. He added a 60-foot steel crown to his roof, just to be sure. And it seemed to work. The Manhattan Co. building completed in 1930. It was the tallest in the world. For about a month. Van Allen had a secret, a trick hidden inside the building itself, known only to a handful of men. He had ingeniously constructed a 185-foot stainless steel spire, the Vertex, in absolute secrecy. It was built in 5 sections, smuggled up the building's elevator shafts, and assembled inside the crown, completely hidden from the street and from his rival. On the 23rd of October 1929, with 40 Wall Street complete and its architect celebrating his victory, William Van Allen gave the signal. In just 90 minutes, the spire was pushed up through the roof and riveted into place, like a needle puncturing the sky. He dramatically, theatrically, and decisively beat 40 Wall Street by 36 meters. But when the Chrysler Building first appeared, many critics hated it. They thought it was an eyesore. The New Yorker called it a stunt. Another critic dismissed it as a ridiculous, modernique building. And yet, today it's held up as one of the world's greatest examples of Art Deco architecture. It's an undeniably iconic landmark. An emblem of New York, Walter Chrysler had wanted his skyscraper to represent opulence and luxury. But there was a problem. The spire was raised on October 23rd. The very next day, October 24th, was Black Thursday, the start of the Wall Street crash. The building that was meant to be a monument to capitalism was topped out on the very day capitalism seemed to die. The Roaring Twenties came to a screeching halt. The extravagance of the 20 seconds was over. As the Great Depression set in, unemployment rates skyrocketed. Nearly a third of New York City's population was out of work. And in a perfect, tragic embodiment of the moment, the Empire State Building, which was already under construction, raced to completion just 11 months later. It stole the Chrysler's title astonishingly quickly in 1930. But as the Depression deepened, the Empire State Building failed to find tenants. It became known as the Empty State Building. Then, the Great Depression and the Second World War conspired to create a 40-year period without any record-breaking skyscrapers in New York. The city's focus was elsewhere, and that long, difficult chapter of its history is recorded in a period of absent high-rises. The skyline was frozen in time. When the skyscraper finally made a comeback, things had to be seriously rethought. By the 1960s, New York was a different city. It was a time of radical change, protests, strikes, and social unrest. It was a time for something new. The ornamentalism and detail of Art Deco felt wrong. It became all about simplicity, function, and brutal efficiency. In an attempt to revitalize the then struggling Lower Manhattan, Japanese-American architect Minoru Yamasaki was selected to design the World Trade Center in 1962. He put forward an idea for two enormous twin towers, a pair of gray, unadorned monoliths, an almost extreme iteration of modernism. They had sleek, straight lines. They were aggressively vertical. They had none of the step-backs or romantic details of the city's Art Deco skyscrapers. These were buildings born out of a very different New York. 110 stories, times 2 buildings. 220 acres of office space created. That's as many square feet as exist in many downtowns of second-tier cities. Yamasaki himself had a fear of heights. This fear meant that the towers had relatively narrow windows, just 45 centimeters wide. They only covered 30% of each building, which made them look like solid, intimidating metal slabs from a distance. But the real challenge wasn't the windows. It was the elevators. At the time, it wasn't economically feasible to build a skyscraper more than 80 stories tall. The reason? Elevators. The higher you build, the more people you have working up the building, and the more elevators you need. But in a structure like this, one that doesn't taper, the floor plate is huge, even at the summit. That means more elevator banks, eating up rentable floor space. And elevators don't pay rent. To get around this, Yamasaki designed sky lobbies on the 44th and 78th floors of each tower. These lobbies broke up the elevator journey. Local elevators took you to the sky lobby. Express elevators took you from one lobby to the next. Crucially, this meant that different elevators could use the same shaft. This massively reduced the overall number of shafts needed. It enabled the buildings to rise 110 stories above the city, but it also created a 3-elevator mini-commute for anyone with an office above the 78th floor. That wasn't all. Structural engineering also had to advance. The support columns for the towers were placed both at the central core, like a traditional skyscraper, and around the outside of the buildings, in the facade. This made each tower a tube within a tube, joined by horizontal trusses at each level. The benefit? There were no support columns within the actual floor plate, allowing for vast, open-plan office space. It was a marvel of efficiency. The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center were a real anomaly in the history of New York skyscrapers. Not just because they were the tallest in the world, but because they were built by the government, the Port Authority. The towers finally opened their doors in 1973 to a public that had grown weary of them. The project cost the equivalent of $4.5 billion in today's money. It had come at the expense of public transportation facilities. Residents of the Radio Row neighborhood had been angrily relocated, and the critics were brutal. They were called giant filing cabinets. The boxes that the Empire State and Chrysler buildings were delivered in, but over the next decade, they slowly became embraced. They were in films like King Kong and Superman. Then, in 1974, Philippe Petit's heart-stopping tightrope walk between them turned these two corporate monoliths into something poetic. The Twin Towers became synonymous with the city itself. They became a symbol of America's economic power, visible from anywhere in the 5 boroughs. A new crown for New York. Big hair, big ideas, big buildings. The 1,980 seconds were about risk, excess, and glitz. It was a time when subtlety was thrown out the window. If you were going to do something, you had to be bold. Architecture was swinging away from the restrained, clean lines of the 60 seconds to something more extravagant. This was an era of experimentation, of clashing styles, of postmodernism. New York was an altogether different beast in the 1,980 seconds too. The Wall Street boom and falling unemployment spurred on the real estate market. At the same time, the city was experiencing record crime and soaring murder rates. It was a place of contradictions, of glamour alongside poverty, but of extreme wealth and opportunity too. And rising from all of it was a new skyscraper on Fifth Avenue that would come to embody the ethos of the era. Enter Trump Tower. At 202 meters, it was the tallest all-glass structure in the city, wrapped in bronze, with interiors made of 240 tons of pink, white-veined marble, mirrors, and brass. The building is unmistakably, aggressively 80 seconds. It contains residential, commercial, and retail spaces. It has an 18-meter high waterfall. Some may call it gaudy, others call it pure luxury. And that may be precisely the point. It wasn't just a building, it was a brand. But to make way for Trump Tower, something of the old era had to be sacrificed. The Bonwit Teller store took the hit. Opened in 1929, the iconic 12-story limestone emporium was an Art Deco gem, designed by the same architects as Grand Central. Donald Trump acquired the site in 1979. He planned to demolish the building. His architect, Der Scutt, later told New York Magazine of Trump's vision, "It has to flash to be good." Preservationists were desperate to save a pair of 4-meter Art Deco sculptures and a large nickel-plated grille over the store's entrance. Both were promised to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They were ultimately destroyed, smashed by jackhammers. The reason given? The effort to preserve them was causing construction delays. In many ways, Trump Tower embodies the runaway ambitions of this time. The 1,980 seconds were the era of Reaganomics, real estate booms and stock market highs, capitalism, growth, and success, no matter the cost. In later years, the tower has taken on new meaning as a place for both protesters against and supporters of the former president. It's perhaps even more divisive now than when it was first constructed. What a building represents, what it means as a symbol, it can change over the years. And just as this story continues to evolve, our exploration of these incredible histories continues every week. If you're enjoying this journey into the stories hidden within our architecture, please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's coming next. Or it can change in a single day. The world changed on 9/11. New York and its tall buildings were thrown into a terrifying identity crisis. How do you build a skyscraper after 9/11? Does the world even want skyscrapers anymore? For a time, at the start of the 2000s, no one knew the answers. Some said, American cities should stop building skyscrapers altogether, fearing they'd create a magnet for future terrorism. Architect David Childs, who would later design the new One World Trade, said at the time that many of his clients would not want to build such visible symbols ever again. It was a gigantic trauma for New York City. The reaction was, will there ever be another skyscraper? One of the very few prominent skyscrapers to actually be built during this era of deep uncertainty was the Hearst Tower, rising a relatively modest 182 meters. While the world was figuring out the future of high-rises, architect Norman Foster plus partners set about completing one from the past. The firm made a conscious, active choice to push forward with construction despite the post-9/11 climate. The historic six-story base of the building was intended to support a larger tower, but the Depression had halted it. Now, decades later, a new tower would rise from the old. The facade of this building is more than just an eye-catching design. Its diagonal grid pattern is its actual supporting structure. It's a design that uses 20% less steel than a conventional frame. It was a potent metaphor, a new, efficient, and forward-thinking structure, rising from the preserved, historic foundations of the past. It was the first skyscraper to emerge in the post-9/11 skyline. In time, the city's high-rise hiatus began to fade, and engineers and developers started to find themselves in a new race, not for height, but for space. It turns out, the skyscraper wasn't over. It was just being reinvented. As the 2000s wore on and rolled into the early 2010 seconds, the reimagined World Trade Center began to emerge, filling the painful void in the skyline. Formed by a potent mix of emotion, politics, and compromise, the tallest new skyscraper to rise from the site, One World Trade, sought to evoke the silhouette of the former Twin Towers. It reached a symbolic height of 1,776 feet, nodding to the year of American independence. And at its feet, a pair of sunken waterfalls on the exact footprints of the buildings that once stood there. The sound of crashing water drowning out the city, creating a space for reflection. New York was beginning to move on, but it would never forget. In a way, the rebuilding at ground zero started the turning of a page. It gave a kind of gentle permission to the city to start building tall again. The high-rise was back. But for a new age, gone are the domineering office towers. Architecture is now an asset. There's not much space left to build on in Manhattan, so as the 2010 seconds progressed, developers started getting even more inventive. The 1,920 seconds may have had Jazz and Gatsby, But the 2022 has a new billionaire class. The 1% of the 1%. Never before has there been so much money for so few. And those people need somewhere to put all that money. Welcome to Billionaires Row. To develop the small, narrow sites remaining on 57th Street, with buildings tall enough to offer Central Park views, developers had to find a new trick. They spent years acquiring the air rights from the properties around their lots. That enabled them to combine those rights onto their tiny sites and build their towers to super tall heights, helpfully preventing some nearby buildings from ever blocking their views. And it's all given rise to this, 111 West 57th Street, the world's thinnest skyscraper. It rises 435 meters above the city, but has a width of just 18 meters, a height-to-width ratio of 2:4:1. The structure offers ultra-luxury apartments. It eventuates to hark back to the past, with a classic stepped-back form and a facade of terracotta, a material not really seen on towers since the days of Art Deco. This remarkable pencil-thin structure and its neighbors were all born out of the latest force shaping New York: extreme global wealth. But here's the twist. These buildings are no longer simply property, they are assets. The luxury apartments they offer are less home and more safety deposit box in the sky. Many are bought by anonymous shell companies and left empty, sometimes deliberately, to retain their value. In mid-2021, properties in the area were reportedly half empty. Love them or hate them. These super slender, half-empty towers now stand as immovable markers of this latest chapter in New York's history. They rise in a time of growing billionaire backlash, in a world that feels like it's changing faster and more unpredictably than ever before. A new kind of crown for a new gilded age. So what does the future hold for New York? Well, the far future, as unknowable as it is, may still hold flying cars and impossible superscrapers. But the immediate future is something we know a little more about. The skyscrapers of the 2032 are being planned today, and we've got a preview. Remarkably, we're about to see a return of the mega office building, much like the Chrysler and Empire State. New York is set to witness its next skyscraper boom. There are at least 4 new supertalls being constructed, collectively adding some 11 million square feet of new real estate to this island. And it's all because of one little decision made in 2017, the rezoning of Midtown East. Now, please don't tune out just because we said rezoning. This is actually very interesting stuff. You see, Midtown East has a problem. It's one of the highest profile business addresses in the world. Over 60 million square feet of office space, 250,000 jobs. But it's also extremely old. The average age of its buildings goes back more than 70 years. The glorious Chrysler Building is there, but it has fallen on hard times. The historical fabric that already existed in Midtown was beginning to need to be refreshed. The spaces were smaller. They weren't wired for the needs of 21st century digital businesses. In response, a dramatic rezoning, a rewriting of the rules was approved. It allows for far greater and denser office buildings. In exchange, developers have to contribute to a new district improvement fund to create a better transit and pedestrian network around Grand Central. Now, we know what you're thinking. The last couple of years haven't exactly paved the way for a great office tower comeback. But that's kind of reminiscent of the birth of the Empire State Building, which found itself adding hundreds of thousands of square feet of commercial real estate into Manhattan during the Great Depression. We may be at a time where there is a dramatic shift in the work pattern, but we are not at the end of cities. Cities are the future. They must be our future. 270 Park Avenue is one of the first new skyscrapers to enjoy the benefits of this greater density. The 423-meter supertall is designed like a series of dominoes, just a bit taller than the Twin Towers were. It returns to the iconic stepped form of classic New York skyscrapers, a move that makes its dominating presence a little easier to take. But 175 Park Avenue, or Project Commodore, as it's also known, doesn't pull back from making an impact. This immense skyscraper is rising just across the road from the Chrysler Building, and at 480 meters, it will completely block out the New York icon. The famous structure from the start of our story, now superseded, consumed by that now relentless race for the skies that it helped start almost a century ago. The Chrysler Building may have only been the world's tallest for less than a year. It may have been disliked when it first went up. But the Chrysler Building is New York. It's bold and brash. It's a product of fierce competition. It's an advertisement, a capitalist monument, and a piece of spectacular art. It's an eyesore and one of the most beautiful structures ever built. What happens when it's covered up? New York is, like all cities, resilient. It persists because it is a place of invention and energy and opportunity. You can tell a lot about a city and its people by the buildings that dominate its skyline, whether it's the church steeple, the mega office building, the half-empty luxury apartment tower, or a true icon. Each is a monument of its era. Our buildings tell us something fundamental about who we are and what we prioritize. That's the case all over the world, but nowhere is it clearer than in New York. But what do you think? Which New York skyscraper best defines its era? And what do you think today's towers say about us? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We may dislike new buildings when they first appear, but the fact is, the city doesn't belong to one person, one time, or one building. It's ever-changing, ever-evolving. That's how it should be. New York City will never be finished.